What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show. And I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be providing you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Dr. Richard House. Now, Richard has been practicing medicine for over 40 years. First as a traditional medical doctor, and for the past 20 years as an acupuncturist, utilizing the chakras for energetic healing. His travels have taken him around the world 3 times and to most of the United States for meditative and higher dimensional work. He lives in North Carolina on an organic farm with his family and holds a 2nd degree black belt in Taekwondo and is a proficient with the longbow. Dr. Richard House, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Richard, I love the title of your book, Between Now and When, How My Death Made My Life Worth Living. Love that. I really want to get into some of your experiences that you had as a child, in the sense of really, you know, touching heaven, in a sense, touching home. But just to begin with, what made you write this book?
Well, that's a good question. When I had the experiences, I didn't really think about writing a book or sharing them. It seemed like it was such a private thing. But as time went on, I could sort of reflect backward and see how valuable it would be for other people to understand that there's so much more going on than meets the eye, number one. And number two, how each one of us is on a spiritual journey, whether we know it or not, and that if we follow the lead of our internal teacher, we will be admitted to dimensions that are beyond understanding and belief. And so I put the book together fairly recently, but about 20 years ago, I got together with a friend and I tape recorded all the experiences so that I wouldn't forget.
Right.
So that's why.
Okay.
To share it with everyone.
Absolutely. Now, thank you for that. That's a very interesting answer, actually, especially when you touch on the dimensions, which we'll get into just a bit later on. So you felt that now was the right time to release the book, because how did your peers or your family take the book as well? I mean, was it scary to sort of, not come out in a sense, but to release this information for others that may look at this as being, well, this is a bit strange?
Yes, as a matter of fact, coming out is a good description, because I am a practicing physician and I see patients every day, except for on weekends. And so I was very concerned that if my patients read this book, they'd say, "My God, what a weirdo." But as it turns out, the opposite was the case. After people read what I experienced, they started coming from all over the country and coming into my office for some treatments, because one of the reasons I entitled the book Between Now and When is because we're in a very special time. And I think a lot of people understand it, particularly when you look at the political situation today. We're sort of in between what was and what is to come. In terms of ages, we used to be in the age of Kali, and in terms of Indian terms, but we're approaching the age of Aquarius. And so people are hungry for understanding more than what meets the eye. So to answer your question, I was pretty tentative, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that my family, friends, and all these other folks have received it so well.
Well, I think there's a lot of, thank you for that answer. I think there's a lot of trust that comes from you with your background as well. And maybe you were meant to have these experiences knowing that you were, with the universe, knowing that you was going to have this journey in a sense, or there was the potential for it. And who better than to be the spokesperson for a near death than a doctor?
Well, you have a point there. Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing started when I was 7 years old, and it was the first indication that my life was going to be different than most. But I was standing underneath a tree that my grandfather had planted many years ago. It was a very tall tree, and I was just experiencing a normal day, age 7, probably had blue jeans on and a striped T-shirt, and all of a sudden I experienced the oneness of everything that is. I experienced myself as not just a little kid, but as everything that is. And only later did I discover that this sort of experience in the Buddhist tradition is called satori, and how precious it was. But as a kid, of course, it was an overwhelming experience. And I thought, wow, I'm not really just a kid. There's something far more that is me. Of course, the experience gradually passed, but I had this odd thing, Kevin, where I wanted to call myself something different, because I was no longer just Richard. And I've heard this from other people that have experienced this state, where they wanted to find a different name. And in my case, the name was, of all things, Ichen, I-C-H-E-N. And I started calling myself Ichen after this state passed. And my mother, who is a very strict woman, educated woman, said, "What's this Ichen business?" She said, "Your name is Richard, and that's the end of that."
What was when you had the experience? Sorry, just to butt in here. I don't normally do this, but this experience, what was it? Did you end up going into some sort of the tunnel, or was it? Could you feel that you had left your body in a sense?
What it was, and this relates to death as well, is that when we are on Earth, we are we have boundaries that we call our body that limit our experience of the universe at large. And so we are conditioned by our brain, by our senses, by our physicality. And so we only see ourselves as Kevin or Richard. Now, that experience that I had erased those boundaries. So I no longer was just limited by my senses, by my thinking, by my vision, or by my physicality. It was like a release. And so I felt this wonderful, all-encompassing sense of being everything that there is. Now, later on, I would call it sort of the experience of being God, basically. So as a kid, I experienced myself as Richard, but also as this other thing. Now, I eventually came into my body again. So it wasn't really so much leaving the body, but having the body expand to include everything.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Okay. And it's not an experience that's very easy to put in words, I'm guessing.
You're right. It was many, many years later that I could really look back at it and see, aha, it was then. Because, even the most magnificent experience that we have is transient until we hit the final experience, which is eternal. So eventually, we all experience ourselves as everything that is. But right now, it's a very limited awareness, and that's what our spiritual journey is all about, really. We are going towards that eternal self that is everything.
Yes, the eternal self that is everything. So it's almost like, isn't it, that when you say you got to experience God, and God's just a word for the eternalness that we're talking about, could you exchange that word for the soul, or do you think it was greater than that?
There is nothing more than the soul. In Indian terms, it's called the oversoul. And so each one of us is the oversoul, sort of redefined or telescoped down into something that can interact with the earth. So our soul and the oversoul are identical, but we don't realize it. It's sort of it's if our soul has been sort of wrapped up in cobwebs, so that we can't see. And I think St. Paul in the Bible calls it seeing through the glass darkly. But our soul and the oversoul are truly, in the last analysis, identical.
Yeah, okay. Very, very interesting what you've got to say. And we're going to move on to the next experience, but that space where you went to, it's almost like, I'm guessing it's almost like the most unconditional loving space that's possibly imaginable, where all issues that you had then, which not many as a child, but as you got older, any issues in your life that were painful were just suddenly taken away, because being back in that space where we probably came from before, it's an undescribable space, but it's a space of such peace that we never find here. That's not that we should all want to go back home now because being here is so important, right? But we can bring that space that you've discovered or you've experienced back into the present moment, can't we?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And I'm glad you brought up that word love, because that really does define where we are, and it defines the glue that holds us all together.
Yes, it's really does come down to that, doesn't it? I hear that from so many people. Love is the answer.
Yes, and those Beatles that sang that, I think they did understand it at some point.
Absolutely, no, absolutely, and probably channeled that as a song that was probably brought from the universe, maybe, as we do bring things in. Okay, well, go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Just moving on then, because I know that there's so much to touch upon here, so many great things. I believe the next event was, or download in a sense, was at 13?
Yes, yes. And so in between that experience and age 13, I was pretty much a normal kid, living in Southern California and going to school and all that. I never shared that experience with anyone. But at age 13, I was I was just minding my own business. Actually, I was doing a drawing, and as it turns out, the drawing was a picture of a hand, my hand, that I had drawn with a pencil, and it was holding a Christian cross. And at that moment, I had this sort of, once again, this very blissful feeling that came across my awareness, and along with it, a message. And this message, and it's very hard to put this into words, but it was sort of like brain mail, just like email, but it was straight into my mind. And it wasn't exactly words, but it was very close to words. And the message was, you will die when you are 33. And that was it. Now, of course, that message was somewhat alarming. And people have asked me, did you believe it? And I said, well, of course I believed it. Because I knew that with the bliss that came forward, that it was truth for me, a personal truth that I was being given. And they say, well, was it a warning to clean up your act? Well, no, it wasn't. It was just a message. And after a while, after I thought about it for about 20 seconds, I thought, well, all right, let's get on with life. And I picked up my skateboard and kept right on going.
Well, what else would you do? I mean, at that age as well. I mean, absolutely. And from that age up to the near-death experience, were you studying any metaphysical material prior to the near-death experience?
You would think that would be the natural thing to do. But I didn't, other than reading a bit of the Bible, which was part of, just going to church and so on. I had absolutely no interest in it. It was odd looking back on it. I didn't even understand that Buddha was an enlightened soul, or that India was a special place. And I just had absolutely no interest in that. And so it is a bit odd looking back on it.
Well, maybe this was, key events that would lead up to even where you are now. Maybe these are just little dots to connect as well. Okay, okay. Well, let's lead up to the near-death experience, and let's sort of what person were you prior to the near-death experience? How was you treating yourself and others? And let's then just edge in then to the experience as well.
Okay. Well, I was a good student and conservative. I was not a weirdo at all. My close friend, Steve Kaiser, and I were buddies, and I never told him anything about this. And once in the early 90s, I said, Steve, one day I've got one hell of a story to tell you. And he just nodded. I sent him a copy of the book, and he wrote back to me, and he said, my God, I can't believe it. So I didn't share this with anyone. So I was a normal kid, basically. But I wanted to be a dentist. That's what my father was, my grandfather as well. And so I did well in college. I was admitted to a fine private school. And there, Kevin, I learned two important things. The first was how wonderful romantic love is. And the second was I learned how to drink. I was in a fraternity and learned how to drink beer. And I found that when I drank alcohol, I felt 100% better. It was sort of like, ever since these mystical experiences, which I had pretty much forgotten about, there was this sort of empty feeling that I had. Like, is this all there is? Is this really me? But alcohol took that away. And so I started having alcohol as a sort of daily thing whenever it was possible. But as I say, I was a good student, planned to be a dentist. I was hanging out in one of the gardens at the college, and I got another one of these mystical messages. And maybe that's why I didn't study any metaphysics, because it seemed like I had my own teacher who was guiding me, But this message was, you shouldn't be a dentist, you need to be a doctor. And so I kind of jumped up and I thought, wow, that's a tough one, because I had very poor grades. In fact, it was impossible, given my situation with grades, to get into medical school. But without going into all the details, it wasn't many years later that I was admitted to medical school, and I started believing this internal teacher that I had, because it was impossible, and there was the fact. I had my MD degree. Not only that, I was one hell of a good surgeon. So I got kudos in terms of my abilities, and got certificates of excellence. So I was a formidable person. Does that answer that question?
It does. No, it does. Absolutely. Okay. So yeah, well, because every near death experience is so unique and so different, and yours is very different, and I think that stands out a mile away. Really, that there wasn't really anything. Some near death experiences, I feel, are there to shake people up, because there's nothing else that would have really awoken them and shaken them up. But could you go down the line that you didn't need that, or it didn't do that for you? It actually you remembered how to go into the space that you can bring into present moment, if I'm making sense?
Yes, I'm going to skip over a lot of the detail and just take us right to the ICU.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah.
Well, what happened, of course, is that it was alcohol that brought me to the ICU. I drank a whole bunch, and by the time I had finished that drinking career, my liver was completely gone, and I started bleeding from every orifice. And I was in the ICU, and the doctor came in, my doctor, in my own hospital, I might add. And he said, well, we've got the lab reports. And he said, do you drink? And I said, yeah, a beer here and there, And he said, well, your liver is shot. You've got enlarged veins in the swallowing tube, the esophagus, that are bleeding. And he said, there is no remedy for it. And I had 18 transfusions of blood that were supplied by my friends and family. And he said, with your permission, we need to shut off the blood. You need to say your goodbyes, and it'll be done in a day or two. And, when he told me that, I had complex feelings, as you might add, or might think. And mostly it was regret and guilt. But my life at the time, even though I was still practicing, was filled with a lot of suffering. I had a lot of hallucinations going on, trembling, all the things that accompany bad alcoholism. So the idea of just ending all that suffering was quite appealing. So I said, fine. And so they stopped the blood, and I was in it was about 2 or 3 in the morning. And all of a sudden, I experienced this wave of comfort. And I really believed that from the time until that I was 7 until that moment, that I had never been comfortable. So this feeling of comfortable was a wonderful relief. And as time went on, these moments ticked by. And I was aware of the heart monitor, tick, tick. And so I was aware of time. And it wasn't many seconds later that I started feeling this incredible bliss. Now, bliss to me is not just the opposite of suffering. Bliss is something that is so profound. What it feels like is that God is in his heaven and all is well. And there is nothing in the world to be afraid or worried about. And the joy and love that is your natural right is what you experience. Now, as that blissful time continued, I started drifting away from my body. And of course, many people have reported this sort of thing. And I could look down at that, my body, and I thought, boy, am I yellow. Because I had this jaundice, of course. Wow. And then once again, it felt like I was being embraced by God himself. And at the same time, I had this loving message. And the message was very simply, you will heal and work for me. That was it. And if I had been able to stand up and salute, I would have. And I would have said, yes, sir. Because I knew that this was God in some form that was talking to me. And even though I had to go back to earth, I was quite willing to do that because of the love I felt for that God. Now, what I was actually experiencing was the love of self, the true self that is the center of our own identity. And so I was quite willing to go back into the suffering. And of course I did. When I got back into my body, of course, I knew something that the doctors didn't. And that is that I was completely healed because I had been in a different dimension when I experienced this. And in this different dimension, disease doesn't exist. And so my consciousness, which runs the whole show, went back into a body, and my consciousness healed the body. And so in 3 or 4 days, I was out of the ICU. 3 or 4 days later, I was out of the hospital.
What did the doctors think of your recovery? Could they understand it?
No. So far as I know, I'm the only one that's ever survived with that particular malady because my liver was so bad that, of course, now they do liver transplants. I don't know if that would have helped back then, but I didn't need a liver transplant. It healed itself. And from that time to the present, I experienced perfect health. I mean, here I am, 70 years old. I take no medication, and I have no diseases of any kind other than a bit of arthritis.
Wow,
so that's not bad.
That's not bad at all. What about the drinking though? Did you stop it completely, or do what did you go teetotal?
Oh yes. When I walked out of the hospital, John, my doctor, said, "Now listen, my friend. You can't drink anymore. If you do, you'll die." And I said, "Oh, that's not a problem." I said, "I'm not going to drink anymore." And so I started practicing total abstinence, of course, but without getting into a bunch of details, I want to skip this part because I spent 2 lovely years in AA helping other people deal with addiction. And of course, it was a therapy program for me as well, because it is hard to adjust living sober if you haven't, if you've had an extensive history like I did. It was a wonderful time. But as that happened, I got reintegrated onto Earth. You see, that was very important. But as my book outlines, that all the things that we have just talked about were just the beginning, because the true story began about a year after I got out of the hospital and had been sober for that period of time, because I started experiencing higher dimensional realities.
Oh, wow. Okay. Tell us about that as well. And was it? Did you recognize the higher dimensional realities due to what the near-death experience, and also how were you going into these higher dimensional realities as well?
Okay. Well, anyone that goes through what I went through knows that you hardly ever get through without a divorce. And I was married to a wonderful woman, but she fell in love with someone else when I was in the hospital. So I was going through a sort of dreary set of circumstances at the time, and was living in our empty house that was up for sale to sort of set the scene. And so I'm sitting on the only piece of furniture in the house looking down at the floor tiles. and it was in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. And all of a sudden, these floor tiles became luminescent with beauty. They became, in a word, the most beautiful thing that I had ever seen in my life. And I was just absolutely astonished by the beauty of these floor tiles that I'd been walking on for years. And after that experience passed, I said, well, now what the hell was that? How can something like that happen? And it wasn't too many nights later that I had a similar experience where I was sitting in the same spot and looked at the TV that was off. And all of a sudden, there was an image on the TV, this little bright dot. And with that bright dot, I got another message, and that was, you will move away. You'll quit your practice and move away. And so these are the ways that these experiences occurred. I didn't do a thing. I didn't meditate. I wasn't reading about spiritual stuff or anything like that. They just happened. And down the road, I could be just walking on a sidewalk, and all of a sudden I would be shifting into this more beautiful place, which I called at the time the beautiful land. And it's a little hard to describe, Kevin, but I could be looking at a scene of, parked cars and trees and a sidewalk, and yet it was so incredibly beautiful that I knew that this was the underlying reality that we don't see. It is the framework for the gross world that our senses report to us. But obviously, there was something more, something deeper. Now, I later found comfort in using the term the subtle world. And so I felt like I was being propelled into this other dimension, yet at the same time, I was attending to my ordinary duties insofar as it was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as time went on, the experiences got more dramatic, and so I started piecing together that there is so much more going on than we ordinarily see. And just as the message alluded to, it wasn't long before I quit my practice and started meditating. Now, in one of the AA groups, I went up to a fellow who talked about spiritual stuff a lot. And I said to him, I'm having these incredible experiences. And he said, well, tell me about it. And so I told him some of what I just talked about. And he said, well, it sounds like this is the real thing. And he said, there are books written about this. And he gave me a few hints. And I read about meditation. I read about the East. I found out that Buddha was a guy. And all these other, Ram, Krishna, all these things that I had no understanding about. And so I started meditating. And through meditation, I started connecting with this inner self that had been guiding my life. And this inner self said, it's time to get up and go. And so I quit my practice and I moved to Hawaii and started meditating. Basically 24 hours a day. And that's when I started understanding how the world works. And so I didn't get my understanding through the books. It was more of a direct experience through meditation.
Now, when you meditated, were you walking through a door that you created in your head? Were you going into a quiet space? Were you walking down some steps and then you would enter into another reality? What was the process for yourself to enter into this, to enter into your higher self or your oversoul?
What I did is eliminated all the distractions that I possibly could. I stopped watching TV. I stopped reading newspapers. I stopped reading books. I had a telephone because I had to have that, but that was it. And then I closed the drapes, and here I was in one of the most beautiful places in the world, right on the beach in Kauai. And I pulled up a chair behind those closed drapes, and I just sat. And I would do this, maybe one time every hour, where I close my eyes, fold my hands in my lap, And when the thoughts came in, like, why aren't you outside enjoying the surf or whatever, I'd push that thought away. And so for me, it was the activity of pushing thoughts away so that they wouldn't be entrained in my mind. And the more I pushed the thoughts away, the slower the new ones came in. And eventually I would get to this place where things were quiet and peaceful. And so I did that not only during the day, but getting up at night as well and doing it. And then as I would walk around the island during the day, I would get these insights, like about reincarnation, for instance, and I'd never really read about it or given it any thought. But one day it just occurred to me that reincarnation is the way that we get from one place to the next. And so it was a very exciting feeling, and I wrote a lot of this stuff down and started sending it to some folks back in the mainland. And some of them still have those notes, I've heard later. But anyway, that's how I learned.
That's incredible. So now each of us have this ability, don't we, to go within. Are we saying then, in your truth, that all answers lie within?
Oh, that's perfect. Yes. And yet, our daily lives are so bundled up with concerns and worry that we never get there.
And most people wouldn't even want to give it the time of day to trust it, that they could even just go into the space that you did, or I can, or someone else can, who does trust it, to go into that space and even give it the time of day, because they wouldn't believe that even the reality beyond this exists. So why even waste their time with it? Which is a shame, but there is that thought pattern out there for some people as well.
Yes, but I would hasten to add that eventually every one of us gets there. Eventually every one of us gets tired of all the distractions. Buddha, and I'm not a Buddhist, by the way, but I've mentioned his name a couple of times, so I need to put that in there. But he said that all suffering comes from desires. And if you think about it a moment, that does make sense. So many of our desires are frustrated, or we're logged into some lifestyle to satisfy our desires. But at some point, we get tired of that. We say, no matter what I have, I want more. Or whatever experience I've had, I want another one that's even better. So at a point, we get tired of all that, and we start looking within. Is this all there is? What happens when I die? How come the people I love don't love me? How come I still lie and cheat and steal? These kinds of things come up, and we start devoting our lives to living or walking the high road. And then we have that pathway inward.
So interesting what you're saying. It really is. Do you think that you have the ability to, if you were to, later on after this call, just go into that quiet space, that you're able to bring in any information that you would so desire? So if you wanted to know something about the universe, you could bring your truth of what that is into the world then?
With a caveat, yes. Because my desire has to align with what is in the best interest of everyone. In other words, if I want to know what stock is going to make money for me, I'm not going to get there, because that's not in my best interest, because it leads to just selfishness and satisfying of a desire. On the other hand, if I want to understand the metaphysics behind addiction, yes, I will be able to go within and find out, because it's in the best interest of the people that I work with. Or if I'm dealing with someone one-on-one and I need to know how to help this person, yes, I can go within. I do. I meditate every day, first thing in the morning at 4 a.m. and last thing in the evening at about 7:30. And I do go to bed early so that I can get up early and do all that. So I have a hell of a social life.
Well, it's because you've got, it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance, and you're managing to balance it.
Well, I've chosen to continue working beyond retirement age because I love doing it. I mean, when God spoke to me and said, "Work for me," I believed him, man. And so that's what I do. I try and help people with their own struggles, whether it be on a universal level. And this is a little off subject, but those of us, and I'm certainly not alone, those of us that have followed this pathway can work on a more universal level. So we're not just working for the people in our lives, but we're working for mankind. And see, right now we're approaching this new age. And so there's a lot of trouble right now. There are a lot of polar opposites. There's tremendous good. What you do is in the good. You're helping to spread messages that help people. And what I do is good. But there's, all you have to do is look at New York Times or the London, whatever it is. And you will see all the bad stuff that's going on, but it's all necessary for us to end this age, sort of tie up all the loose ends to get to the next age. And so there are many of us that do this kind of inner work. And so the inner work is the way that really we change things, not one person at a time, but reconnecting with higher dimensional energies and then helping usher in this new age. So that's what I'm about. That's what everyone else is doing this is about.
And I agree with you. It's so essential. When we, as you've said there, what we do is good. Even that, we can probably take that conversation further in the sense that I don't think the soul or the God or however you want to term it cares about good or bad. From a non-Christian or non-religious perspective, it doesn't care. I don't think. I think, as you've just said, the perfection is in the disorder that's out there right now. I mean, right now in the UK, there's political turmoil with our ex-EU.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's about to be political turmoil, and there is in the US with if Donald Trump gets in. That's a big. I'm not anti anyone. I'm just saying I can see that there's massive change taking place, right? And throughout the world, but it's the perfection in it. It's as though the soul is so desperate to be here, right? As we are, as from my understanding, that it needs this for it to grow. If it was all just one way and perfect and all singing and dancing, it may as well have just stayed on the dimension it came from.
Oh, that's perfect. I wish I had said that.
You did.
That is so perfect.
You did. We're all one. Remember that.
Yes. It's the yin and the yang. We need to have both in order to have perfection. And so the good and the bad have to be balanced out. And it's only when there is perfect balance that we can shoot up to the next level. That is perfectly said. So there has to be tremendous turmoil. This world is going to have to be on fire in order, and I'm talking about that metaphorically, in order for the phoenix to rise.
Well, you know something. The amount of people that have come on here, Richard, to say that there is great change taking place, that's what's coming through them as intuitives. I wonder if that they may be very, very right.
They are right. The turmoil and sort of collapse of what we experience as our culture now is absolutely not only foreordained, but absolutely necessary. And I'm going to save you the energy of asking the question, when? Because I don't have a clue.
No, and even if you did tune into that and get the answer, the future is not set. It really isn't. And, we have free will, all of us do, to change the course. I do believe that.
Yes. And so that's why the answer is unanswerable. That eventually when balance is achieved, to the soul's great satisfaction, then the phoenix will arise. And we will have a world that is vastly different. This beautiful land that I was talking about, that's the when in my book title. We have the now, but the when is when the beautiful land that I experienced, where everything is so beautiful, and I forgot to mention this, but when I was in those states, there was no worry and there was no fear. Can you imagine a daily life on this earth with no worry and no fear?
I could imagine the place called home, which I came from, being like that, but this reality, it's not easy to see that or feel that.
No, you're right. But imagine how different things would be if all of mankind was freed from that. Because fear is the opposite of love. Worry is the opposite of love. And so in the new age that comes, there will be distractions and shadows, but there will not be what we have now. There will not be a Trump. There will not be EU that needs to hang together no matter what. You know, these things
But look what Trump
will devolve.
But look what good Trump does. But look at the good things that Trump does. He's brought out the corruption in the system. He's brought out the racist card as well to show that there is a lot of racists still in America. Had he not come along and been doing exactly what he's meant to be doing in a sense, then there's great healing that takes place from that.
Boy, I think I should be asking the questions and you answering. That is perfect. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so even the Hitlers and all the tyrants and the bad people, Vlad the Impaler, all of these serve a purpose.
But that's easier said than done, isn't it? Because when 50 lives get taken in the worst shooting in America's history, that's easier said than done to those families who maybe not coming from the space that we're able to come from, and us in such suffering right now from the loss and all the lives it affected as well, and the trauma that they've had to experience from being in that situation. So it's not easy, is it? These aren't overnight solutions, but I tell you one thing that I think what you're touching upon to bring the world together is oneness. If we saw ourselves more as family, when I watch my UK news right now, and I've never seen such divide in this country right now. It's really bad, and you see the people on TV saying, we don't need the immigrants. This is our country. I'm like, brother, they are you on a soul level. Just because they have a different color skin and language, it's as though this great veil that's over us is allowing this experience to take place because it needs to. It wants it.
Oh, yes, and it is unstoppable. And so when you look at some of these problems that we call problems, they only will lead to a better solution that could possibly have happened without all this turmoil.
Another very interesting thing you touch upon as well, which you said before, is I think you may have used the word truth. All through this interview, this information has been your truth. And would you say that when people are able to go into that space which you talk about, which that everyone's able to go into, because the way you described it is very simple, and I like simple things, that you can come up with your own truth, and if your truth is different from someone else's truth, that's okay, because when you possibly go back home, then you probably will find that on the other side, in the dimension we go to, there is not one truth, there is many truths, and when we cross back home, we're still trying to work our truth out. Now, some people will say, well, I've never heard it described like that before. Surely there's just one overall truth. What if there isn't?
Well, another metaphor that I kind of like, one of those old wagon wheels that has spokes and then a big rim. Are you familiar with what I'm talking?
Yes.
Like from an old carriage?
Yes.
Okay. If you look at each of those spokes as being a philosophy or a religion, on the outer rim, they're all separated by some distance. But if you were to take any one of those spokes, philosophical or mystical path or religion, and work yourself down towards the hub, at the hub, they would all be identical.
That's very well said.
So the truth is not an exclusionary truth. There's not just one, but all truths meld into one.
Okay, yeah, that I could, yeah, okay. Also, when your life now, which I don't know too much about, I know you're living on a farm. Am I right to say that?
Yes.
Yeah. And what is that? What is that symbolic of? Do you think? Why have you chosen that lifestyle?
Well, on Saturdays I clean out the goat barn, which means scooping up the manure, and then I work in a garden. These are all earth connection activities. In order for me to work in higher dimensions, which I do every day, I have to be connected to the earth. And so I work the farm, I plant things, I grow things, I eat from the soil, and I keep livestock. And then the other important thing is to keep socially connected. And so my son and his family, I have 3 grandbabies who live 50 yards away.
Oh, that's beautiful, yeah.
Yes, and I have a personal love, of course. These are the things that allow us to be expansive, because the truth is so fiery and wonderful that if we're not careful, our feet are lifted off the ground and our head goes up into the cloud somewhere, and we experience oneness, but it doesn't do anyone else any good. So, in other words, I keep myself grounded on the farm.
That is so important. I think to have, even in your career, you've always kept one foot in the metaphysical, spiritual, and one foot in this world, because being here is so important. For myself, and I've said this in other interviews, if I had both my feet in spirituality, I would. What's the point being here? I would be all over the place. I wouldn't be experiencing life as it should be. Do you know what I'm saying?
You're right. You couldn't conduct this interview.
No, absolutely not.
Because you have to be grounded. You have to be connected. You have to have enough money. Well, how do you get money? All these things are designed so that we can be entirely whole as a person. We can't be all in our head or even all in our heart. Sometimes you meet people that are so overwhelmed by heart energy that they're not functional. It's great to be around those folks, but they're not going to get much done in life.
No.
So we have to be all things.
And just going on to your partner as well, this is interesting to me in a sense. Now, obviously you remarried. Now, is she was she very open to these subjects? Was it just always discussed? I mean, obviously it has been now, but is she on the same understanding as you, or are you two opposites in a sense?
Oh, she keeps me grounded.
Right. That's good. Okay.
She's the voice of reason. She's at the gym right now, waiting for me to join her. So she keeps me active, so that I take care of my physical body.
That's good.
I do yoga and all that other stuff at the gym. So yeah, if she was like me, my goodness, I can't imagine. But when people see the two of us together, what they see is a whole.
Yes,
so they
beautiful.
see her and all the time. The other day we were walking down the street in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is one of the real beautiful places in America. I was on the first vacation that I'd taken since the 1990s. And this European woman came up behind us, and as she walked by, she said, "You are such a beautiful couple." Now, I guarantee you, Kevin, that I am not a beautiful guy. But the two of us together have this energy that speaks of beauty. And it speaks of completeness. And so she is not where I am. And that's a good thing.
Right, that's very, very interesting, yeah. And I guess she came along at just the right time as well, when it was meant to be.
And doesn't everything.
Yes, doesn't. That's right. I'd love to get it. There's so much we haven't covered. I mean, when you touched upon desires and everything else and all sorts of other subjects, there's a lot there we could have talked about. What would you say, and I hope I've done this justice, this interview, but what would you say is the most important message of your work? Because we did touch on dying a little bit, but is there anything that you'd like to say that might be helpful to the audience?
Yes. I think the first thing to understand is that there's more going on than meets the eye, because people have a certain level of dissatisfaction and they say, is this all there is? Well, I guarantee you, my friends, this is not all there is. And it doesn't matter if you meditate or do any of these other things. What I say to folks is, work on your virtues. We all have non-virtues. If you can be better than you would be every day, and it won't be long before that inner teacher awakens. So all you need to do is pay attention to what your life circumstances are. Not everyone is going to go around the world on a spiritual journey. It may be that you're a housewife and that you have children that need attending, and so on and so forth. Or you may be very dissatisfied, or you may be in the clutches of addiction. But there is no life path that will fail to bring you where you need to be. It may take place over more than one lifetime. So I would say that my advice is kind of hang tough and live your life as best you can, keeping in mind that virtuous behavior is the way to the inner self. If you can have love in your life, if you can sacrifice for others, if you can stop your non-virtuous behavior, if you can get out of addiction and into recovery, these will lead you where you need to go.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Thank you. Well, Richard House, all I can say is thank you so much for coming on, and we will get you back on hopefully in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. It was my pleasure.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.